Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing the Sex in Literature tag. This tag was created by Brian over at Bookish, and a link to his original video will be down below, as well as to anybody I tag. Since this is Sex in Literature, the discussion could be problematic or offensive, and if anybody finds this video problematic or offensive, I'm sorry in advance. And we can discuss this in the comments. This is the second time I filmed this video. The first time I wasn't happy about it while I had lunch, and I decided maybe I should give this another go and try to explain issues that rise up during some of my answers to these prompts. So, as Brian explains, one of the reasons that prompted his tag was a discussion over the depiction or lack thereof of LGBTQ characters in sexual situations. Usually, if a book has LGBTQ characters, they're side characters, they're minor characters, they really don't get sex scenes. And one of the questions directly relates to that. Now, I myself am gay, and I do have an interest in collecting gay literature. I don't have a particularly impressive collection, and it is hard to find, but I've had some success. So a lot of my answers to these prompts will feature LGBTQ characters in sexual scenes and situations. But again, just because I have quite a lot does not necessarily mean that it's anywhere near enough. There really should be more books out there with LGBTQ characters in sexual situations. And I will talk about that more in question number 6. And question number 7 too, for that matter. So now let's begin with the prompts. Prompt number 1. What is a book you have read that comes close to crossing the line between literature, adult fiction, and pornography? Now, before we begin with that, we need to define, what crosses the line? What goes into prose pornography? And for that, I have 2 books. The Glamour Thieves by Allmon, which is a cyberpunk urban fantasy in which the characters JT an orc and Austin an elf steals some kind of technical gizmo, I think. It's been a while since I've read it, and basically, the plot's forgettable. And I will explain what the main point of the book is in a few seconds. But first, the second book is The Moon's Deep Circle by David Hawley. This is a book about high school senior who discovers his older brother's diary and learns that his older brother was a member of a neo-pagan cult, church, temple that, as part of their rituals, involved gay sex. Lots and lots of gay sex. And he and some of his classmates, teammates, who are also gay, sort of begin to emulate the cult. Or society, yeah. Just go with cult. Okay, now, how these two books cross the line into prose pornography is that basically you're not here for the plot or the characters. You're here for the sex scenes. They're meant to arouse, to titillate, but I mean, it's basically the reader is there for the sex scenes, nothing else. So, with that out of the way, what crosses the line? I would go with, well, the book I have here that I think nears that line, but never quite goes over it, excuse me, is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. This is the book about a tracker who is hired by a mysterious merchant to find a kidnapped child. He is joined by several other mercenaries, outcasts, to find this child, and then later goes on a quest for revenge. And there are several explicit sex scenes, but I mean, those scenes are never meant to as the whole story. It's just character progression, plot progression. So, the other book that I think may near that line, without going over it, is Docile by K.M. Sparza. Now, I can't show it because it's not been published yet. I've read early reviews of it that mention that it is rather sexually explicit, and I'm pretty sure it will kind of approach that line without necessarily going over into pornography. But we shall find out. I've pre-ordered it, and I hopefully will get it March 3rd when it releases. So, moving on to prompt number 2. What is a book you have read with a cringeworthy depiction or discussion of sex? I'm going to go with... I have 3 books for this one. The Sundered Realm, which I want to say, if I remember, it's been a while since I've read it. The depictions of sex is very sort of juvenile, very sort of just really cringeworthy. Also, George R. Martin's Game of Thrones, where Dany and Khal Drogo's relationship is quite cringeworthy, although I think some later sex scenes in the book or in the series gets quite cringeworthy too. But I've really only read the first 3. I've read A Game of Thrones, a Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords. I haven't read Feast for Crows or Dance with Dragons yet. And finally, Dryland's End by Felice Picano, which I have described numerous times as the worst science fiction novel I've ever read. The depiction, of sexuality is rather weird and just quite cringeworthy. Some of the relationships and how that works. But again, it has been eons since I've read this book, and I probably should reread it. But I remember really sort of, cringing at a lot of the sexual situations in that book. Prompt number 3. What's the most overrated book with a reputation for being sexy that you have read? Nothing really jumps to mind that I have in my personal collection. Um, so I'm going to take a pass on this um, prompt. Prompt number 4. What is your favorite passage from a book about or describing sex or a sexual situation? Um, for this one, I am going to go with The Moon's Deep Circle by David Hawley. There's a scene rather late in the book that describes a initiation into the cult that is remarkably done. Just remarkably done. Although there is quite a bit of cringeworthy scenes. Um, Obviously, the leader of the cult is a mythology professor, and many of the cult members are his students or former students, so there's that sort of imbalance of power. And then the initiate is the journal writer's younger brother, which is, yeah, just weird. But it is also, I think, very affecting. Okay, okay, where are we at here? Prompt number 5. What is a book you have recently read that you think handles descriptions, discussions of sex well? So I've got quite a few for this one. Obviously, Black Leopard, Red Wolf handles it quite well. The Tiger's Daughter by K. Arsenault Rivera handles the relationship of Oshizuka and Arsalaya wonderfully. I would also go with Bloody Rose. So Tam Hashford's relationship with... Oh, I'm blanking on her name. What the character's name is. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, where is it at? Oh, Kura. I think the relationship between Tam Hashford and Kura is very well done. And the relationships in the House of Shattered Rings and the House of Binding Thorns by Aliette de Boddard are well done too. But given that they are all LGBTQ, I'm going to talk about a bit more about them in the next prompt, which is prompt number 6. What are some books that contain positive and frank depictions of sexual relationships between LGBTQ plus characters? Oh, the ones I've just shown. So again, I think the relationship between Tracker and the Leopard and Black Leopard, Red Wolf is remarkably done. And both characters are hard to have relationships with. But, it's really very well done. The relationship between Oshizuka and Barcelaya Shafali and the Tiger's Daughter is, I think, brilliantly depicted. Even though they are side characters, the relationship between Celine and Emmanuel in The House of Shattered Wings, I think, is remarkably well done. The relationship between I'm forgetting who the guy's name is. The relationship between Asmodeus and Thuan in The House of Binding Thorns. Brilliant, although it doesn't quite get into like an actual sex scene. I think it's well done. Again, the relationship, the sex scenes in Bladed Rose with Tim Hashford are pretty good. So the relationship between Gil and, I'm not entirely sure what the name of the duende he falls in love with in The Still Remains, but I think that's a really pretty well done relationship, even though it does end in tragedy. And I'm honestly quite torn about the relationship between Rune St. John and Adam St. Nicholas in The Last Son. When I first filmed this video, I kind of put it in cringe, like the second prompt. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I think, in a way, the sex scene in this book is meant to be hard to take, uncomfortable, because Rune St. John is the victim of a gang rape when he was a teenager, and he's never quite gotten over it. He's never gotten over it. It haunts him to this day. And pairing him with a character who is as sex positive as sexy, I guess, as Adam, it makes for a somewhat uncomfortable relationship. Even though Adam is, throughout The Last Son and into The Hanged Man, depicted as being a really, really great boyfriend. That their relationship is remarkable, just like this powerful romance. But at the same time, it's complicated. It's maybe almost too good to be true to a certain extent. And I think that's sort of when I've talked about The Last Son, my ambiguity about the book is, I think that ambiguity perhaps maybe rubs me a bit the wrong way. Or maybe I was hoping for something else, which I will kind of go a bit more into depth on that. In that, yes, I showed quite a lot of books that depict LGBTQ characters in sexual relationships, or the beginnings of such relationships. And it's perhaps maybe, it's never really enough. It's there always needs to be more depictions of that. And I think to a certain extent, one of my issues with The Last Son is that I'd wished for maybe more of, I guess, Guy of the Week or something like that, where, I mean, it would be more sex positive, where when Adam is rescued by Rune and they first meet, and Adam basically jokingly offers rescue sex, that it would, yeah, I mean, playing more with that rather than this really awkward, uncomfortable sort of relationship that Edwards, yeah, goes with in the story. But anyway, but I mean, it is very powerfully done. Just, yeah. I guess in a way, I'm wanting, like when it comes to LGBTQ characters, particularly in fantasy, to not really have to deal with that as struggle with society as we do here in this world, I guess. So prompt number 7. What do you think is the best way of depicting sex in literature fiction? Well, okay, accepting prose pornography, in which obviously the whole point is the sex scene. It's the arousal, the titillation of the reader. If we're going with other literary genres, if there are sex scenes, they need to pull double duty. I mean, yes, they can try to titillate or arouse or maybe even make the reader uncomfortable, but there needs to be double duty or triple duty going on. The sex scene needs to enhance the plot, to move the plot forward. It needs to enhance characterization, to further character arcs and character progression. But again, it's also very much a matter for the writer. If a writer isn't too comfortable writing sex scenes, then fade to black or work around them. If a writer is comfortable writing sex scenes and is good at it, then, I mean, it's okay to put them in. And if, for whatever reason, a writer has a compulsion to include sex scenes far more than probably is required, and definitely work on that. Both as, I mean, practice in the writing and reining oneself in, looking at myself in the camera. So yeah, so those were the main prompt points of the sex and literature tag. I'm only going to tag one booktuber, Jason of By Reason Bookland, because I'm pretty sure he can handle this tag. As for anybody else who wants to do the tag and feel comfortable doing it, you can go ahead and do so. Consider yourselves tagged. In reflection, I mean, this was a rather difficult tag to fill. It does deal with some hard topics to talk about, particularly with the freedom that maybe one, wishes one could have, and just like wax poetical for 30 minutes or an hour on this subject. And I know very much like my take on The Last Son is, yeah. I mean, again, I've struggled with the book for, ever since I first read it. And so there's a part of what I wish it was and what it is, and really looking at it for what it is, and the how Katie Edwards does get some things, does do some of what he's aiming to do right, even if it might necessarily be the kind of fantasy starring a gay protagonist I would wish it were. But anyway, I'm nattering on now, so I think it's probably about time I wrap this up. So, thank you, BookTube. Have a great day.